Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, from closed-door meetings between Vice President Cheney and the energy lobby to warrantless searches of private communications, there's a growing culture of secrecy in Washington. Is it justified by the threat of terrorism, or are we killing democracy in the name of saving it? We chat with Patrice McDermott of OpenTheGovernment.org. Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley signed the nation's first living wage bill this year. It will be up to his Secretary of Labor, Licensing and Regulation to put the law to use. We'll talk with Labor Secretary Tom Perez about his enforcement plans. Polls show that global warming is now the #1 environmental issue in the country. But what's to be done about it? Big changes are needed, according to Betsy Taylor, and that's why she's launched the One Sky Initiative. Also, we look back at this summer's Capital Fringe Festival and the dance performance by the Weerd Sisters. Poet Kwame Alexander has a memo to the company president, and the Blue Moon Cowgirls offer up some country licks and lyrics on the Coffee House. Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. The recent anniversary of the World Trade Center and Pentagon attacks was a sobering reminder, if we needed one, that there are very dangerous people around who mean us harm. Our government does need effective tools to stop them. But terrorism isn't the only menace to the American way of life. Our guest maintains that our open society is threatened as well by the culture of secrecy that has flourished in Washington, especially since 9/11. Take the FBI's use of tens of thousands of so-called national security letters to obtain email and telephone data about suspected terrorists. Congress passed a provision in the Patriot Act that the FBI needn't bother with court-issued warrants to listen in or monitor these communications, and internet and phone companies can't alert their customers. That, ruled Federal District Judge Victor Marrero in early September, is, quote, the legislative equivalent of breaking and entering, with an ominous free pass to hijacking constitutional values. The Patriot Act is not so unusual these days, according to OpenTheGovernment.org Director Patrice McDermott. OpenTheGovernment.org is a coalition of groups disturbed by the growth and spread of governmental secrecy. Welcome, Patrice, to the Coffee House.
Thank you very much.
We're getting pretty accustomed to government operating in the dark. We have the CIA prisons abroad. We have the forced deportation of people to countries where they torture. Yeah. But is it really any different than what's been happening for years and years and years? Is there something different about the way it's being done today?
I think yes. I think there's a qualitative difference as well as a quantitative difference. As we say in the secrecy report card, every administration wants to control the message about itself, and they want to spin the message to put themselves in the best light. But this administration is, without doubt, the most secretive since at least Nixon, which is saying quite a bit, and maybe further back than that. And this has taken us back to beyond where we were at the depths of the Cold War. I mean, we've always had, in times of national stress, there's been a tendency to exercise greater secrecy and greater control over information. But we are not, we're not really in a war at this point in the sense of our nation truly being committed to a full-out effort, and but we are still restricting information across the board, not just security classified information, but environmental information and all sorts of information that the public really needs to protect themselves and to ensure that the government is protecting them.
Well, we'll compare, for instance, the classification of document policy, declassification of document policy for security reasons, say, under the Clinton administration versus the current Bush administration.
Sure. And under the Clinton administration, and whatever its failings, it was an administration pretty much committed, rhetorically anyway, to openness. Under the Clinton administration, for agencies to classify information, it was much more difficult for agencies to classify information, and it was also, Clinton was the one who initiated the concept of automatic declassification, that after documents are 25 years or older, that they are subject to automatic declassification, and he made it harder to reclassify information. And the standard was set higher. There had to be a grave harm to national security, not just a harm to national security. The Bush administration has lowered the threshold for classifying, and they've lowered it significantly for reclassifying information. And we've seen quite a bit of that in this administration, which is very troubling because this is information that has been declassified, is out in the public, is used by historians and journalists, and now it's reclassified. And what are they supposed to do with it? But yes, there.
In terms of numbers, are there more documents being classified today than there were under the Clinton administration?
Yes, significantly higher, at least a third higher, and fewer are being declassified than there were, even with a massive automatic declassification. Yes.
Okay, but we're in the post 9/11 era.
Right.
Clinton was pre 9/11. I go to the airport, I go through the hassles of TSA security, and I think, on the other hand, maybe I'm prepared to deal with that rather than share a flight with a suicide bomber. Doesn't the same thing apply to intercepts of our communications, be they internet or telephone? If they're going to protect us against a terrorist attack, a lot of people, I would say, would probably be prepared to accept that as just the real world we live in.
Yeah, and I think there's several different problems there. The first is, and before I came to the coalition that I head up now, I was at the American Library Association, and we were involved in the fight to remove libraries from being recipients of national security letters. The problem with national security letters is that the government can issue them on its own say-so. There's no adult supervision, and they never go to any court. So you don't know whose information is being gathered up, and we have heard recently that the information that they're creating what they call these communities of interest. So, it's like the gossip game. If you called somebody who called somebody who called somebody who called somebody, and somebody 50 people down the line called a terrorist, your information can be swept up in that as well as theirs. And information that the government is getting, sometimes the letters are written, actually the letters are usually written fairly narrowly, but they sometimes sweep in information that they are not supposed to get. They keep it anyway. We asked an FBI counsel one time what they did with information they swept in with this stuff. If it showed that I, for instance, had nothing to do with terrorists, and they said, "Oh, we keep it because we never know when we might be able to use it later or we might need it." So, yes, at one level, we do want the government to do what it needs to keep us safe, but we want it to do it with a respect for our other branches of government and with a respect for our civil liberties, because once those are eroded, we may get some of them back, but we never get all of them back. And we've gone a good ways down the road now towards a loss of a lot of civil liberties, although the courts are starting to react, which is good, and Congress is sort of reacting.
And it isn't just, though, a question of classification,
Oh,
declassification of documents. Documents sometimes get disappeared, it seems, as well,
Right.
like 5 million emails from the White House
Yeah.
between March of 2003, October of 2005. Maybe it has something to do with trying to conceal information about what happened to those U.S. attorneys that
You
got
think?
fired.
How convenient is
But
the
how
church
do we hold folks accountable? They say they just disappeared.
Well, and there are suits that have been brought. The Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington crew has brought a suit against the administration, and the National Security Archive has just brought a suit against the administration on just these issues, because these are violations of the law. These are not just happenstances, and one can assume that they were not just coincidental or accidental, but they're violations of the Presidential Records Act.
And what's the penalty for that?
Good question. I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm just wondering
yeah.
if it's a Pyrrhic victory if they win these court suits, because the real issue is what's in those emails, and we may never get them.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a very good question, and I don't know off the top of my head what the answer to that is. But and for the President's office, it's a violation of the Presidential Records Act. For some of the other offices, it's a violation of the Federal Records Act. And this is actually indicative of a bigger problem throughout the government with email and electronic records.
Now, you mentioned before that you used to be with the American Library Association, and I noticed that there's apparently an effort in the post-9/11 era by the government to have chaplains at the prisons censor the religious materials that inmates are now allowed to read, and they're going through the stacks and removing what they consider to be offensive religious literature.
Yeah, I saw that report in the Times, I guess it was today or yesterday, and I don't know what to make of that. I'm sure one would hope that the prison librarians will object to this.
And the funny thing about it, of course, is that this was brought to our attention by a lawsuit on behalf of religious people, one who's a Christian and one who's an Orthodox Jew, no Muslims involved.
Right. Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. But yeah, the First Amendment issues are huge with this administration.
It isn't as if citizens are without redress or opportunity to try to get this information. There's something called the Freedom of Information Act, and people have been bringing Freedom of Information Act requests to government agencies for years. How have they fared recently?
Not so well. There's a real problem with agency backlogs. When you do a Freedom of Information Act request, whether you're an average citizen or a member of the press or whoever, you get into a queue. And it's supposed to be first in, first out, although there are abilities to ask for expedited processing if you're a member of the news media and there's a pressing story. I don't think news media usually use the FOIA because it's usually so slow. But there's enormous backlogs in many agencies, and so that's a real problem for the public. And the other problem is that until...
Now, these backlogs are in part caused by understaffing, aren't they?
Yes. The FOIA offices are, as with the records managers' offices, sort of the stepchildren in most agencies. It's the one avenue where the public can go to ask for information they want as opposed to what the government wants to tell them, which is what their websites are. But they are often severely understaffed, and the people are often moved into these jobs from other jobs and have a learning curve, because the law is actually fairly complex in terms of the exemptions and what they have to withhold and what they can withhold.
And it should be pointed out, I suppose, that there is an exemption for anything that has to do with national security.
Yes,
so
well, there is.
Anything that is withheld could have been withheld prior to any of the more recent.
If it's properly classified.
If it's properly classified. Let's talk about classifications briefly. We're running out of time.
Okay.
But there's top secret, there's classified, but there are these new categories that have popped up that have been used by the government to keep. Tell us about those.
Those are really actually more troubling to me and to a lot of us in the access community. The classified system actually has rules and it has a process, and you can ask for things to be reviewed and they get declassified eventually. These new, what people are calling pseudo-classifications or pseudo-classified information, are these categories that some of them are created by statutes, but about 80% of about 107 of these across the government, 80% are just made up by the agencies. And there's no process for reviewing this information. The agency can say, you can't have this because it's sensitive security information or it's for official use only. There's no appeal. There's no time limit on it. There's no controls over who can put these markings on there. It's a black hole that this information enters into, and we have no way of tracking it and no way of knowing how much information is being kept secret from us for those reasons. I went in to meet with a member of Congress a chairman of an important committee and started talking about this. And he said, yeah, he said, I got something from DHS that says for official use only, so I can't do anything with it. And I said, no, that has no statutory basis. You're not bound by anything. But of course, a new Congress, a new Democratic Congress, there's a high learning curve. But they're gulling the public and they're gulling Congress by saying that these are legitimate withholding categories, and it's a very serious problem.
Well, perhaps it's the inevitable impulse of bureaucracy, governmental or corporate, to pad its own power and image by hoarding pivotal information. But experience teaches that when the public fails to insist on its right to know, the result is abuses of power, deception, and ill-considered policies. Many thanks to OpenTheGovernment.org's Patrice McDermott for joining us to discuss the threat posed by governmental secrecy and for reminding us that in a democracy, we are the sovereigns. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
Today, let us toast. I have decided to ask for a pay decrease. I know it sounds strange, but I no longer want the promotion or the vacant office. Sick leave, pointless. My cabinets are well stocked with echinacea. Plus, I want to be a team player. In fact, I am returning my comp time. From now on, I will work weekends for free. There were no bonuses for us last year, but do know that theoretically, I am giving that back too. See, I now realize that it would be healthier if I were miserable on purpose. It would be healthier if I were miserable on purpose rather than continue working in earnest while corporate greed and calculated lies shatter your pledge of loyalty.
Welcome to WorkLife at the Coffee House. What should the minimum wage be? Should people be paid a living wage? These are the kinds of questions that get talked about in the legislature and in the media. But just as important as what's in labor law is how these laws are enforced. And recent reports, including one looking specifically at the state of Maryland, suggest they are not being enforced very well. That employers too often have little to fear when they violate labor law, which hurts both workers and law-abiding employers who are put at a competitive disadvantage. The person in Maryland responsible for enforcing the labor laws is the Commissioner of the Maryland Department of Labor Licensing and Regulations, and that's Tom Perez, formerly a Montgomery County councilman. Tom, thank you so much for joining us again on the Coffee House today.
It's great to be back.
So what led you to the position of Secretary of Labor of the state of Maryland? What drew you to this position?
It's a remarkable opportunity to protect and empower Marylanders. Dollar is an octopus. We have many tentacles. We protect and empower workers by enforcing low-wage worker laws, wage and hour laws, prevailing wage laws, soon to be living wage laws. And so we can protect workers in that context. We are involved in workforce development, so making sure that workers have the tools to compete in the global economy. We oversee the Office of Financial Regulation, and so I'm very heavily involved in conversations about our foreclosure crisis. And so we have many other offices as well. And it's if you're, for instance, if you do a home improvement project and your contractor bilks you, who do you call? You call Dollar at our home improvement commission. If your real estate agent bilks you, you call the real estate commission. And so we have a very strong consumer protection component, worker protection component. When you go to the fair, who makes sure those rides are safe? It's our office. When you go into the workplace, who makes sure conditions are safe? It's our occupational safety and health. And so it's a wonderful octopus. It's a wonderful opportunity to serve, and that's what motivated me.
Okay, and today I wanted to focus some on these workplace issues in particular.
Sure.
And I know that you're also involved in setting the administration policy, the governor's policy for the state. Could you tell us something about these issues, these workplace issues, in the recently completed session of the state legislature? What was on your agenda and how much of it did you accomplish?
Well, the number one item on the agenda was the living wage bill. The governor made that a top priority. Maryland became the first state in the country to enact a statewide living wage bill. There was a wide coalition of people who supported that, including many delegates here in Montgomery County, Tom Hucker in District 20, other people very, very heavily involved, Progressive Maryland, very involved. But I would respectfully assert that if the governor hadn't put his own reputation on the line and expended political capital, it would not have passed. And I think people agree with that. And so we now have the state's first living wage law. We've just put out the proposed regulation, and the law goes into effect October 1st. And we're very excited to be working with all stakeholders. We've had some disagreements with the business community on this, but to their credit, they have come to the table and said, that was yesterday's news. Today's news is how to ensure compliance. And so that was the number one priority.
Well,
and
were there others?
Well, an equally important priority, quite frankly, was rebuilding our capacity to enforce basic wage and hour laws. Governor Ehrlich didn't give a hoot about protecting low-wage workers. That's about as charitable as I can think of. And as a result of that, he gutted the prevailing wage unit. He gutted the wage and hour enforcement. And by gutting, I mean he zeroed it out.
Now, these are units of
units,
your department that are charged with enforcing.
And these are units. So, for instance, if you were promised by your employer that he or she is going to pay you $10 an hour, and at the end of the week you get paid $6 an hour, what do? Well, one of your options is to go to the Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation and file a complaint, and we will investigate that. In its heyday, there were 35 investigators. Governor Ehrlich zeroed it out. He got rid of the division that enforces those wage and hour laws, and also a division that enforces what we call prevailing wage laws. A lot of union contracts, other contracts call for the employer to pay what's called the prevailing wage in the industry. And that unit was gutted. And if you don't have anybody to enforce it, you can't.
So was this an issue that the legislature addressed? I mean, what happened on this issue?
Well, what happened, and this is where the power of the governor is so critical to understand. The governor, the office of the governor in the state of Maryland is the most powerful executive in the United States in terms of all the state governors, for one simple reason. The governor submits the budget. He has, or she has, hopefully someday, the power of the purse. And the legislature can reduce items in the budget, but they can't add them in. So when he zeroed out the wage and hour unit and zeroed out the prevailing wage unit, that is Governor Ehrlich, the legislature was basically powerless to act. They did some things, and now under Governor O'Malley's leadership, we are in the process of resuscitating that and rebuilding.
So is there office. Has that happened? Are there funds now coming to fund those offices? And so now, so what do you do with that funding?
Sure,
what's the plan to resuscitate those agencies?
Sure. The plan is nuts and bolts law enforcement. That's a big part of what we do. And so we have been spending a lot of time reaching out to various communities to let them know we are open for business again. We've been doing a lot of outreach. We have to be smart with our resources because, frankly, the phone was ringing. Literally, we were getting 800 calls a week about wage and hour issues. And yes, we're ramping up, but we have 12 investigators doing wage and hour and prevailing wage work. Not nearly enough. The governor recognizes that, and he's committed to a wholesale rebuilding of that enforcement.
Well, let me ask you this question that comes up often. we have a federal Department of Wage and Hour Enforcement. There's a federal minimum wage law. There's federal wage and hour laws. Why do we need a state apparatus? Doesn't that just replicate what happens, what people have accessibility to these federal enforcement programs?
Well, I'm a big believer in what I've often called redundancy in law enforcement. We need federal laws and we need state laws for the simple reason that laws are only as good as the political will of the people enforcing them. We have not had an effective federal presence for the last 7 years, whether it's wage and hour enforcement, whether it's protecting consumers in the mortgage context, whether it's the FDA, whether it's environmental enforcement. Enforcement has been non-existent in this Bush administration, and the nasty combination of Bush and Ehrlich really meant that it was open season, that employers, frankly, could do anything they want. I think that's wrong, and Governor O'Malley, much more importantly, agrees, and that is why you need effective systems of state law enforcement to augment that, because chances are, at any given point in time, the political will to enforce laws that are on the books simply isn't going to be there.
Well, tell us a little bit more. I mean, you've talked about the wage and hour resuscitation of that program. What other initiatives are you contemplating or are you beginning to initiate?
Well, one thing that I've been very concerned about, and the governor's very concerned about, is this growing phenomenon of misclassification of employees. And what do I mean by that? When someone comes to work for you, you have to classify that person and figure out whether they are an employee, that is someone who's getting benefits, or whether you're going to classify them as an independent contractor. Well, what we're finding, we did a random audit of 2% of the state's workforce in 2006. And what we found, and that's about 2,900 employees, that's 2% of the state workforce. And what we found was that 40% of the employers had misclassified their employees. And the overwhelming misclassification was the misclassification of an employee as an independent contractor. And let's think through what that means. What that means is that you're not paying that person workers' comp, so that if they're injured on the job, they're not going to get help. When somebody is paid, they're not paying into the unemployment insurance system. And one of the hats that I wear is I'm the state's third largest tax collector because we administer the Unemployment Insurance Commission. And so we're losing money there.
Do you have any idea of the magnitude of any of this in terms of revenue losses?
Well, we're in the middle of extrapolating our survey data into those figures. But New York State, for instance, there was a study done by researchers at Cornell University, found a very similar phenomenon of misclassification. And the fiscal impact just in the unemployment system alone was hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right. So what do you, I know there's states out there, Massachusetts was one of the first ones, I believe, who actually changed the law to address this.
Right.
Do you have similar plans?
Right. The good news in Maryland is that we have a very good law in the books that basically creates a presumption that when a person comes on board, he or she is an employee, and the employer has to effectively rebut that presumption. The bad news is twofold. Number one, I believe that the penalties for the violations of these laws are really, they're not a threat. And secondly, and arguably more importantly, Maryland has the second lowest ratio of auditors to employers in the country. So we simply don't have enough auditors doing the work. We need more enforcement capacity so that we can hold people accountable, because this is a worker safety issue. This is about leveling the playing field for employers who are playing by the rules, and this is also about making sure that taxes that should be in our system, workers' comp, unemployment, and income tax.
Because if federal taxes as well.
If you are getting a W-2, if you're paid by a W-2, the odds of you're paying taxes are something like 98, 99%. If you're paid via what's called a 1099 form, which is the form that independent contractors get, the data shows that the likelihood of paying taxes is about 70%. So we're losing tens of millions of dollars in income tax during a period where we have a $1.5 billion fiscal deficit.
What about that second weakness that you mentioned, that the fact that the remedies for the penalties for these kinds of violations are not significant? Is there any plans to address that?
We're looking into that right now. Illinois, for instance, Governor Blagojevich just signed a law that dramatically increased the penalties for willful violations. I do believe that there are some employers that we need to educate, and we're going to redouble our efforts to educate. But we also need to take a look at industries where we're finding that there are chronic problems. The construction industry, quite frankly, is an industry where we have seen a significant amount of misclassification. And so we need to take a much closer look. I'm going to be reaching out to stakeholders in that industry because, again, this is about worker protection. This is about rewarding employers that play by the rules and not creating an unlevel playing field.
Well, can this all be done administratively? Can there be regulations and regulatory change, or is there also a need for some kind of change in the law itself? And do you have any plans of bringing any of this to the legislature? We just have a few seconds left.
The most important thing we're trying to do right now is go to the Department of Labor, because that's where we get our funding from. And this is a 100% federally funded program. We're going to ask the Bush administration for additional resources so that we can beef up our auditing staff. That's a critical area. And then obviously we're looking at legislative fixes at a state level. And I'm hopeful that we'll address this next year.
Great. Well, it's clear that Tom Perez has a great deal on his plate these days. The enforcement of labor law is one big part of his responsibility, and it clearly presents a huge challenge. It's not enough to pass laws that are intended to assure decent workplace conditions. Those laws need to be enforced. We wish you well, and thank you for joining us again here on the Coffee House. I'm Fred Feinstein, and this has been WorkLife.
Right in the belly of the American bureaucracy is growing a most unconventional annual expression of the arts, the Capital Fringe Festival. This year's festival, held in July, featured the likes of the Gregor and Olga Show, Ninja Motorcycle Babes, and a group of performance artists and dancers known as the Weerd Sisters, led by Silver Spring's Diana Tokaji. The Warehouse Theater near Chinatown hosted Tokaji Works for the Living, an eclectic blend of dance, music, mime, and theater pieces inspired by the lives of the performers. This ambitious hour-long show aimed to express the range of human emotions and largely succeeded. Diana Tokaji opened the show with the amusing In a Hut. Pieces of India, performed by Margaret Riddle, paired simple props and projected photos to depict images of the subcontinent. 17-year-old Karen Cohen joined Tokaji in a sign language-enhanced poetic delight, lost for words.
Melodies or tapes too hard to find now. Traded for a nickel brother song. Caught, wedged in something awful, tell you air. Pierced, cursing silver circles, slicing hole. We're going down fast. Hold on to the air, she's crying. Hold me.
For Diana Tokaji, Works for the Living has deep personal significance. She conceived many of the show's concepts while suffering from a bout of pneumonia.
Of going from associating myself halfway with the dying and halfway with the living, and reaching a point in my life where I chose to commit completely to being alive.
Soprano Chinwe Enu showcased her rich, melodious voice in Let Her Pass Over. The
title Works for the Living, you know, I think goes without saying some of its double meanings. Certainly one of the meanings for me is that this work we are doing as artists is for our lives.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. I'm your host, Mike Tidwell. National attention to global warming has never been greater. Every day the newspapers and networks blare the news. The Greenland ice sheet is imploding, hurricanes are getting bigger, sea levels are rising. But where is the parallel burst of political action? Where's the Million Family March on Washington demanding a clean energy revolution now? Well, my next guest, Betsy Taylor, believes she has the answer. There's a lot of noise coming from concerned groups and activists and earnest politicians all across the country about global warming, but there's no single clear and unified message, a clear political demand coming from the movement. To address this critical point, an exciting new effort is actually being launched all across America this autumn. It's called the One Sky Initiative. The full slogan is even more exciting. One world, one future, one chance. Betsy Taylor has been a central leader of the One Sky effort. She is a well-known author and longtime social activist, as well as the founder of the Center for a New American Dream. Betsy, welcome to the Coffee House.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, first of all, you know, we've got record hurricanes, we've got sea level rise, documented the Arctic ice is vanishing at speeds that scientists thought were even possible 5-10 years ago. I mean, it's happening. We're deep into global warming, and we can see it. Strange weather everywhere. Why don't we already have 1 million people in Washington demanding, you know, protesting and being active on this issue?
Well, I think we do have a very vibrant movement growing. The where we are now is so different than where we were even a year ago. But the problem is it's scattered. It's very typical in American movement politics to have 100 different groups, but they're not coordinated. I also think there are ways in which the media and the foundations that support these groups contribute to their separation. Every group has to have its own brand. They have to have their own policy proposal. They have to have their own name in the media. So
they compete. They're encouraged to compete.
The system sort of encourages competition rather than collaboration. But and I think for the public, that can be confusing. People can, you know, they see all this stuff, they know there's a problem, but there's not an easy on-ramp for the public to say, what do I do? How can I help? And that's what's so essential right now, and that's what the One Sky campaign is going to try to help with.
So it's your view that people are out there, they're ready, they're concerned. You know, I mean, it used to be activists like us, you know, we had to have the flyer that explained global warming. Now they read about it in the newspaper every day. So the awareness is there. You think people are ready to get engaged, but the approach has to be somewhat different. So what is exactly One Sky?
Okay, well, One Sky campaign is a new campaign that's been put together by leaders from numerous sectors, from the faith sector, the student sector, scientists, and of course people from the environmental sector coming together because out of a sense of real urgency. You're right, you know, we are in a crisis situation, and if you look at the science, you know that. So we've come together essentially to ask groups to demand 3 things from the federal government. If we're going to solve the problem, the U.S. government has got to take bold action, and it's got to take it very quickly. And we are organizing around this 2008 election so that at least by 2009, with a new Congress and president, we can put through a completely different set of bills that will change the rules of the road.
Well, how do you, I mean, so you want to change the rules of the road, and you want to make an ask of politicians, and global warming is intensifying. The goal is to have this ask match what's actually happening in terms of the science. So what is that ask? What is bold enough to match the Arctic ice cap disappearing right now?
Well, I mean, the bad news is that things are going fast in terms of the climate. The good news is that if we had the political will, we actually could turn things around. It's just enough time. So the ask for the One Sky campaign is there's 3 pieces. First, focused on energy conservation. We believe in the next 8 years we could very easily just conserve 20% of all the energy that we use. And we're calling for the creation of 5 million jobs, 5 million green jobs focused on achieving that goal. So that's number 1. Number 2, stop putting new emissions into the air and make deep cuts as fast as possible. The European Union has committed to reducing their emissions by almost 1/3, 30% by 2020 if the U.S. will match them. Well, we're going to match them. So our demand is that we cut emissions 30% by 2020, which would take a huge mobilization to pull off, but it's doable, and it would really change the carbon trajectory from going like this to going like this. And the third is to invest in renewable energy and build no new coal plants until we can sequester carbon emissions.
Well, this sounds great, and a lot of groups would like to support this, but I mean, how do you make this new thing happen? I mean, it sounds like a nice ask. Are you going to create a new entity, a new group, a new staff? How's it going to work?
No, we're not going to create a whole new group. This is a campaign of existing organizations. So while we're going to have a small hub and staff, very lean and very good team of people doing it, we're going to invest in existing groups, and we're going to partner with hundreds of groups around the country, but all unifying around the same bold ask, so that politicians hear the same things when they go to Iowa, when they go to South Carolina, when they go to Florida, and that in 2009 they know what's expected of them. They know that we can't have any more of these, politically possible half measures that aren't going to solve the problem. We've seen that with healthcare.
Well, is there a historic parallel for this? I mean, has this ever happened before? We had a lot of groups working on some social cause, and then there was something like One Sky that came about that moved that movement forward. Do we have a precedent for this?
Well, in my life, the precedent I draw from is the Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign in the early 80s.
I remember.
And I was on the founding committee of that, and there were many groups that came together for this one goal. Look, just stop the nuclear arms race. Stop testing, deploying, and producing nuclear weapons. That's it. In this case, it's a little more complex in terms of the ask, but the ask that we're asking for actually would solve the problem. It would actually turn things around. Most of the policy proposals now are focused on what is politically possible. They're not focused on what is scientifically necessary.
And what kind of response are you seeing? First of all, where can people learn more? I mean, I want to make sure.
Oh, thank you for asking me that. So there's a website, oneskycampaign.org, and if people want more information on how to get involved themselves, they can just send us an email at oneskyinfo@gmail.com.
Okay, but the first one was oneskycampaign.org. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now, what has been the response so far? I mean,
it's been amazing. We have, scientists from across the country saying go and go faster, go quickly. One of the most exciting events coming up here in the Washington area is in November 3rd through 5th. Students are going to be coming in from around the country. We're partnering with Energy Action, which is a coalition of all the student organizations, and with Step It Up, which is a fantastic group up in Vermont with Bill McKibben. And we are going to have a big set of training programs at the University of Maryland for 5,000 young people. And on Monday, the 5th, every young person in the Washington area should go down to Capitol Hill and push the One Sky agenda.
oneskycampaign.org. I've been an observer of the global warming movement in this country for quite some time, and I have to say this has been an exciting new development. I know you've said that there are a lot of creative people in lots of different corners of the country doing great work, but the whole is not match those independent parts. And this is something that brings folks together. I'm wondering, how did you get into this? Why you? Why now? I know you've been an author. You've founded the Center for a New American Dream in the D.C. area. You've been in the philanthropy world. Why One Sky? Why climate? Why you? Why now?
Yeah, I think for me, it's now my life. I'm going to give my life to working around the climate issue. And it's for two reasons. It's because if you look at the science of climate change, if you've seen Inconvenient Truth, all you have to do is Google. You Google Greenland melting ice. You go to YouTube, look for a picture, melting glaciers. You just go on tonight and look at that. All you have to do is look at the science, and we have very little time to turn this around. So I want to be part of those people who are putting their shoulder into it. The good part is I believe we can. I believe that we not only we can solve the problem, but in doing it, we can turn the economy into a much more vibrant, much fairer economy. We can create jobs. We can feel secure again. We don't have to go to war for oil. So I really like to give my life to a beautiful possibility. And I think, like with so many people, Mike, I have kids, and I believe that we have a moral responsibility.
Well, it really is a moral issue, and there's something about that One Sky logo, and I know we've shown it here on the show, that's very emotional and very hopeful, and that seems to be the buzz around this. Now, where do you see this organization 2 years out? I mean, where are we headed? I know the ultimate prize is 2009. What role do you see One Sky playing between now and then?
You know, somehow together we have to get out of our comfort zones right now. I said earlier that there are a lot of reasons people aren't mobilized to their full extent, and I think part of it is that we're maybe just a little too comfortable. It's a little bit like cholesterol. You don't know it's killing you until the doctor says, hey, you better change your diet. Same with carbon and that. So with this campaign, if we're wildly successful, in 2 years, there will be millions of additional people raising their voices and saying, let's turn this around now. We have just enough time.
Well, I know this bold ask of 30% reduction in greenhouse gases in America by 2020 means a transformation of our economy and radical change. Has there been any pushback from, say, some of the more established political groups or environmental groups that think that that's too bold? I mean, I know that the slogan for One Sky is make the impossible possible. Yeah. So it seems politically impossible to pass a bill that says 30% reduction with coal and oil opposing it.
A year ago, it was impossible to even talk about climate change on the Hill. Now there's 80 bills up there. So I don't accept what's currently politically impossible. And most of the people in One Sky do. We have had some pushback. People always ask, what's it going to cost? If we were being attacked right now by a group that was going to maybe jeopardize our food and water supply, make the temperatures increase, we would not be standing around saying, how much is it going to cost? So we have had some pushback, but on the other hand, we've had enormous engagement.
Well, this idea of an ask in terms of global warming that matches what the scientists say is actually happening and what's necessary to achieve, getting the scientific voice in the same sort of initiative with the faith folks, the student folks. I mean, that hasn't really happened. I mean, we think of the scientists as separate, but there seems to be an activist voice of the scientific community behind this.
Yeah, actually, the scientists in many ways are at the heart of this. I was just on with Stephen Schneider of Stanford a few days ago, one of the top climate scientists in the world. James Hansen of NASA is a public endorser. And what Stephen was saying is, go faster, go faster. So I really think we have to go into our hearts and we have to ask ourselves what really matters, and we have to look into our children's eyes, and each of us needs to do something. And it has to be, yes, the light bulbs, yes, biking to work, but also insisting that our elected officials do the right thing.
And who do you see in the last few seconds that we have left? Who do you see in Washington on Capitol Hill as the leaders most likely to push for the kind of ask that One Sky is making? Who are the champions you see?
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders, all right.
Yeah, write to Bernie and thank him. He's got the backbone we need.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much
Mike.
for being on Coffee House. Well, a big thanks again to Betsy Taylor of the new One Sky Initiative. If it's true that we have one last chance over the next 10 years to save our fragile climate, as I believe we do, then the One Sky movement may very well be the thing future historians point to as the spark that saved us all. I'm Mike Tidwell, and this has been 21st Century Life.
All the dreams ocean, like stars in the blue. And I got a notion that I can live without you. I'm gonna quit my crying when you start goodbying. I'm gonna quit relying on the likes of you. Stay now, 'cause you can go and play now. It won't make me blue. You'll never change, dear. You'll stay the same, dear. But your little game, dear, it boomeranged on you. There's other fish in the ocean, a lot of stars in the blue. And I got a notion that I can live without you. Gonna quit my crying when you start goodbying. I'm gonna quit relying on the likes of you. I'm gonna quit my crying when you start goodbying. I'm gonna quit relying on the likes of you.
Well, greetings, Karen.
Hi, David.
Pleasure to be back.
Thank
Have
you.
you back here.
We're glad to be here.
In one of your many groups. How do you guys figure out song selection? I mean, you got 4 strong egos here, and
well, we have 3 lead singers in this group, and each of us brings songs to the
sound table.
That's right, the
Yeah.
sound table. Lynn's background is mainly bluegrass. Ann's is more from an old time, and I guess mine's country, so we get a little bit of all 3 mixed in together.
And then there's
our wonderful guitarist, Ira.
who just brings it all out.
That's right. He
All
can
right.
play anything.
Now, the song you opened with, what was that called?
The Likes of You
And
was recorded by George Jones.
so we'll assume it's not one you wrote.
No, not that one.
My background is mostly klezmer, Jewish music, you know. But that's neat. I mean, what happens with everybody contributing is it balances the set, and everybody not only gets equal time, but you don't just hear same old, same old.
Right.
It's really cool. Is there a song where a lot of you get leads in the same song?
Yeah, in fact, this next one we're going to do.
How did that
we
happen?
each
Isn't
take
that
a lead on a
amazing?
verse.
Truth in advertising. We scripted this. We knew this was going to happen. Okay, well, take us out with the Blue Moon Cowgirls with everybody getting a lead.
Right.
And Ira gets a little in here, I'm hoping, right? A little. Okay, take it away.
Oh, the road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. The road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. Another gal has got my baby and gone. I've got those blues, I'm wearing at the soles of my shoes. Got those blues, I'm wearing at the soles of my shoes. My guy went away and left me. He left me with the doggone blues. Oh, the road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. The road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. Another gal has got my baby and gone. Never miss your water till the well runs dry. You never miss your water till the well runs dry.
You never miss your baby until he says goodbye. Oh, the road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. The road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. Another girl has got my baby and gone.
Oh, wish to the Lord to bring my baby on home. Yeah, wish to the Lord to bring my baby on home. I'm not so lonesome, I just don't want to be alone.
Oh, the road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. The road is rocky, but it won't be rocky long. Another girl has got my baby and gone.